Daniel had just married the woman he believed God chose for him. The vows were spoken, the church was clapping, the pastor had just blessed the union. But only minutes later, the groom pushed open a quiet hallway door and saw something that turned his heart to stone. His bride was in her wedding dress. The pastor was still in his clerical robe, and right there, in the house of God, they were kissing, not arguing, not praying, kissing. But the truth behind that kiss was even worse. And that morning, as golden light slipped through the curtains of his room, he sat on the edge of his bed, smiled to himself, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Today is the day." His best friend, Marcus Hill, a tall, lively man who had known Daniel since college, walked into the room carrying a suit bag and a cup of coffee. "You're already awake?" Marcus asked with a grin. "Man, I thought I'd be the one dragging you out of bed." Daniel chuckled and took the coffee. "There's no sleeping on a day like this." Marcus shook his head. "You really love her." Daniel looked down for a moment and his smile softened. "I do. I really do." Across town, in a bright bridal suite buzzing with activity, Vanessa Moore sat in front of a large mirror while makeup brushes moved across her face. Vanessa was a beautiful young woman with elegant features and a quiet, polished presence that often made people think she was calm, even when she was not. Today, wrapped in white satin and surrounded by flowers, she looked every bit like a dream bride, but her hands would not stay still. "Vanessa, relax," said Tina Brooks, her bridesmaid and closest friend, a sharp-eyed woman who noticed things other people missed. "You're twisting your fingers like you're about to take an exam." "I'm fine," Vanessa said quickly. Tina raised an eyebrow. "You've checked your phone 6 times in 3 minutes." Vanessa forced a small laugh. "I said I'm fine." But she was not fine. Her smile came too late, her breathing was too shallow, and when her phone lit up again, she grabbed it so fast it made Tina stare. Before Tina could ask another question, the door opened and Claudia Moore entered. Claudia was Vanessa's mother, a proud and controlling woman who cared deeply about appearances and what people would say. "Vanessa," Claudia said firmly, adjusting the veil with careful hands. "Stop looking nervous. Today is a blessing. Daniel is a good man, a stable man, a godly man. Do not ruin this moment with unnecessary emotions." Vanessa swallowed hard. "Yes, Mom." At the church, joy was already filling the air. Relatives laughed, ushers moved quickly, musicians rehearsed. Everywhere, people kept saying the same thing. "This marriage is blessed. What a beautiful couple. God truly joined these two together." Then Pastor Elijah Grant arrived. Pastor Elijah was the respected leader of the church, a powerful preacher admired for his confidence, polished words, and commanding spiritual presence. The moment he stepped into the sanctuary, people greeted him with smiles and reverence. "Pastor, today is a glorious day," one deacon said. Pastor Elijah nodded. "Yes, God will be honored here." But just for a second, just for one small second, his expression shifted when he glanced at his phone. He turned the screen over quickly and slipped it into his pocket. No one noticed. No one but the Lord saw every shaking hand, every delayed smile, every restless glance, and sometimes the signs are there long before the storm breaks. Sometimes people just do not want to see them. A few minutes later, Daniel stood in his dressing room, fully suited, staring at himself in the mirror. Marcus straightened his tie. "You ready?" Daniel smiled, full of hope, full of trust, full of love. "More than ready." He had no idea that before the day would end, that same heart would be fighting not to break in two. A few minutes after Daniel stood in that dressing room full of hope, the sanctuary began to fill. The church looked beautiful that afternoon. White flowers lined the aisles. Gold ribbons wrapped around the chairs. Soft music floated through the room like a blessing. Friends, neighbors, and relatives settled into their seats, smiling, whispering, and turning their heads each time the doors opened. Everybody was waiting for the bride. Everybody was ready for joy. At the front of the church stood Daniel Cole, tall and steady in his black suit, his hands clasped tightly before him. But though he stood straight, his heart was racing. He kept glancing toward the entrance, breathing slowly, trying to calm himself. Marcus leaned closer and whispered, "Daniel, if you squeeze your hands any harder, you'll break your own fingers." Daniel let out a nervous laugh. "I just want everything to go right." "It will," Marcus said. "This is your day." Daniel nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door. Then the music changed, every head turned, and there she was. Vanessa Moore stepped into the sanctuary in her wedding gown, her veil falling softly over her shoulders, her bouquet trembling ever so slightly in her hands. For one brief moment she looked almost unreal, like a picture somebody had painted and breathed life into. Her father, Richard Moore, a quiet and dignified man, who rarely raised his voice, walked beside her with a stiff face and careful steps. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Y'all, that man forgot the whole room existed." "She's beautiful," Marcus murmured. Daniel could barely speak. "Yeah," he whispered, "she is." As Vanessa walked down the aisle, people smiled and dabbed at their eyes. Some said, "Thank you, Jesus." Others shook their heads in admiration. From the outside, it was perfect. It was shining. It was everything a wedding should be. But when Vanessa finally reached the altar and looked up at Daniel, her smile trembled just a little. Daniel noticed it. "You okay?" he whispered softly. Vanessa nodded too quickly. "Yes, I'm okay." Before Daniel could study her face any longer, Pastor Elijah Grant stepped forward and lifted his Bible. His voice, deep and polished, spread through the sanctuary with practiced authority. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and before these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy marriage." The church fell silent. Pastor Elijah spoke about covenant. He spoke about sacrifice. He spoke about love that endures trials and remains faithful through every season. His words were strong, his tone was powerful. People listened with admiration, hanging on every sentence. "Marriage," he said, looking from Daniel to Vanessa, "is not built on feelings alone. It is built on truth, trust, and the fear of God." At those words, Vanessa lowered her eyes. Then came the vows. Daniel turned to her fully, his voice thick with emotion. "Vanessa, before God and everyone here, I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by you. In joy and in pain, in plenty and in lack, I will not walk away from you." Vanessa swallowed before answering. "Daniel, I promise to be your wife, to honor this union, and to stand with you through every season." Her words were clear enough, but something in them felt heavy, just a little heavy. Then they exchanged rings. "With this ring, I thee wed," Daniel said. "With this ring, I thee wed," Vanessa repeated. Pastor Elijah raised his hands over them. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." A wave of joy swept the church. Applause broke out. Someone shouted, "Hallelujah!" Another voice cried, "Glory to God!" Then Pastor Elijah smiled and said the words everyone had been waiting for. "You may kiss your bride." Daniel stepped forward and kissed Vanessa gently as the church erupted in cheers. The organ played louder, cameras flashed, families stood clapping with pride. And yet, even in that moment, Vanessa's eyes moved away too quickly. A tiny sign, a passing shadow, the kind of thing people ignore when happiness is making too much noise. But stay with this story, because sometimes the loudest celebration is standing only one step away from the deepest disgrace. Only minutes after the church erupted in cheers and applause, the celebration began to shift toward the reception hall. Guests poured out of the sanctuary, laughing, hugging, and talking over one another. The musicians struck brighter notes. Children ran between the rows of chairs. Camera flashes kept going off. Everywhere Daniel turned, people were smiling at him, shaking his hand, patting his shoulder, calling him a blessed man. "A married man now," one uncle shouted. Daniel laughed, still glowing from the ceremony. "Yes, sir." His mother, Helen Cole, a warm and prayerful woman whose gentle strength had carried her family through many hard years, pulled him into a hug. "I'm proud of you, son." "Thank you, Mum," Daniel said softly. Then he looked around. "Where's Vanessa?" Helen glanced toward the back of the church. "I thought she was with the bridesmaids." At first, Daniel did not think much of it. A bride needed a moment. Pictures, makeup, family interruptions, little delays. Those things happened. So he kept smiling. He kept greeting guests. He kept pretending everything was still moving as planned. But after another minute, then another, he started searching the room with his eyes. "Tina," he called when he spotted the bridesmaid near the aisle. "Have you seen Vanessa?" Tina frowned. "She was here a second ago. I thought she went to freshen up." Marcus walked up beside Daniel with 2 glasses in his hand. "Reception coordinators asking where you two are supposed to line up." Daniel forced a quick smile. "I'm just finding Vanessa." Something in his tone made Marcus lower the glasses. "You want me to come with you?" "No," Daniel said. "It's fine." But it was not fine, not anymore. As Daniel moved away from the crowd, the noise of celebration began to fade behind him. He stepped through the side hallway, near the church offices, the quieter part of the building where the laughter could barely reach. The polished floor reflected the overhead lights. The walls felt too still, too empty. Then he heard it. A voice, low, urgent. Then another. Daniel slowed his steps. The sound was coming from the corridor near Pastor Elijah's private office. His heartbeat changed. It did not race at first. It dropped, heavy, hard, like something inside him had suddenly gone cold. He moved closer. Pastor Elijah's voice came first, strained and hushed. "This should not have happened, not today." Then Vanessa. "I know," she whispered. "I know." Daniel froze. Every part of him wanted to believe there was another explanation, another Vanessa, another reason, another truth, anything but the thing creeping into his spirit. Then he took one more step, and he saw them. Vanessa, still in her white wedding gown, her veil hanging down her back. Pastor Elijah, still in his dark clerical suit, standing far too close. And before Daniel could even breathe, before his mind could protect him from what his eyes were seeing, Vanessa lifted her face and kissed the pastor. Not by accident, not in confusion, not for one broken second that could be explained away. It was a real kiss, a hidden kiss, a guilty kiss. "Y'all," Daniel's heart nearly stopped. He stood there like a man struck by lightning, his body locked, his face drained, his soul trying to reject the sight in front of him. Then Vanessa opened her eyes. She saw him. Her whole body jerked back. "Daniel!" Pastor Elijah spun around, his face losing all color. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then Daniel's voice came out, low and broken and dangerous all at once. "What did I just see?" Vanessa stepped forward, trembling. "Daniel, please!" "Don't!" His voice rose sharply. "Don't say my name like nothing happened." Pastor Elijah lifted a hand. "Son, listen to me." Daniel's eyes blazed. "Do not call me son." The hallway itself seemed to shake with the force of those words. Just minutes after heaven was called to witness a holy union, hell had answered from the corridor. And the worst part, The celebration outside had not even stopped yet. Only seconds after Daniel's shattered voice thundered through that quiet corridor, the air changed completely. The joy from the sanctuary still floated faintly through the walls. Laughter, music, celebration. But in that hallway, something holy had just been torn apart. Vanessa stood frozen in her white gown, her lips parted, her face drained of color. Pastor Elijah remained near his office door, one hand half raised as if he could still calm the disaster with a few careful words. But this was already beyond calm. This was beyond control. Daniel stared at both of them like a man who no longer recognized the world around him. "What did I just walk into?" he asked again, louder this time. "Somebody answer me." "Daniel, please," Vanessa whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Please let me explain." He laughed once, but there was no joy in it, only pain, raw pain. "Explain what? Explain why my wife is kissing the pastor minutes after our wedding?" Vanessa covered her mouth and began to cry. Pastor Elijah stepped forward carefully. "Daniel, this is not the place." Daniel swung toward him so fast the pastor stopped moving. "Not the place," Daniel shouted. "You should have thought about place before touching my wife in the house of God." Y'all, that hallway could not contain the pain in that man's chest. Vanessa reached toward him. "Daniel, listen to me. It is not—" He jerked back from her hand. "Do not touch me." The words hit Vanessa like a slap. She stumbled backward, clutching her bouquet so tightly that a few white petals bent under her fingers. Pastor Elijah tried again, his voice dropping into that polished, steady tone people trusted from the pulpit. "Son, emotions are high. Let us speak privately and—" "I said do not call me son," Daniel roared. "You stood at that altar. You held that Bible. You prayed over us. And then this. His voice echoed so loudly that a door opened at the far end of the hall. Marcus appeared first. Daniel, then Tina, then Helen, then two ushers, then Claudia Moore, rushing forward with alarm already on her face. "What is going on?" Claudia demanded. No one answered immediately. No one needed to, because one look was enough. Vanessa crying in her gown, Pastor Elijah pale and shaken, Daniel standing between them like a man whose heart had just been ripped open. Helen's hand flew to her chest. "Lord, have mercy!" Marcus frowned. "Daniel, what happened?" Daniel did not look away from Vanessa. "Tell them!" Vanessa shook her head, sobbing now. "I can't!" "Tell them!" Daniel thundered. Pastor Elijah stepped in quickly. "There has been a misunderstanding." Daniel pointed at him with a trembling hand. "A misunderstanding does not kiss my wife behind closed doors." The hallway exploded. Claudia gasped. Tina went still. One usher muttered, "Jesus!" under his breath. At the far end, more guests had begun drifting toward the noise, and then the whispering started. "What did he say?" "The pastor?" No. "On the wedding day?" Phones began to rise, eyes widened, faces turned. In a matter of seconds, the private betrayal became public shame. Claudia rushed to Vanessa. "Say something! Vanessa, say something!" But Vanessa could only cry harder. Helen looked at Pastor Elijah with deep, wounded disbelief. "Pastor, tell me this is not true." Pastor Elijah opened his mouth, but no clean answer came out. That silence said more than any confession could have. Daniel looked around at the gathering crowd, at the horror on their faces, at the church that had been celebrating him only moments ago. His voice dropped, but somehow it hurt even more. "You all saw us get married," he said. "Now look what was waiting behind the blessing." And just like that, the wedding was no longer a wedding. It was a scandal. It was a humiliation. It was a public wound, and the reception had not even begun. Less than 10 minutes after that hallway erupted in shock and whispers, The wedding celebration was dead. The music had stopped. The reception doors remained open, but almost nobody was moving toward them now. Guests stood in clusters, murmuring behind decorated chairs and flower stands. Some looked stunned, some looked ashamed, some looked far too interested. The joy that had filled the church only moments ago had drained out like water from a broken vessel, and Daniel Cole could not bear one more second of it. He tore off his boutonniere and threw it onto a nearby table. "There will be no reception," he said, his voice hoarse. "There will be no speeches, no dancing, no pretending. This is over." "Daniel!" Vanessa cried, stepping toward him through her tears. "Please don't walk away like this." He turned and looked at her with such hurt that even Claudia fell silent for a second. "Walk away?" he said. "Vanessa, you walked away first. You just did it in a white dress." Y'all, that line hit that room like a stone through glass. Vanessa broke down again, and Claudia immediately pulled her close. "Enough!" Claudia snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. She looked around at the watching crowd like she hated them for seeing what had happened. "Everybody needs to calm down. This is stress. This is confusion. This day has been overwhelming." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "Stress?" Helen shook her head slowly, tears standing in her eyes. "No, Claudia, stress did not put them in that corridor." Tina, who had been quiet until then, folded her arms and spoke carefully. "I knew something was wrong this morning." Vanessa looked up sharply. "Tina, please." But Tina did not stop. She kept checking her phone. She was nervous, not wedding nervous, something else. Claudia turned to her. "This is not the time for accusations." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Then when is the time, Mrs. Moore? Before or after the pastor kisses the bride?" Across the room, Pastor Elijah finally stepped forward again, trying to recover the authority that had already slipped from his hands. His face was tight now, his voice measured. "What happened was a moment of weakness," he said. "It was wrong, I will not deny that, but it was not what some of you are imagining." Daniel stared at him. "A moment of weakness?" "Yes," Pastor Elijah said quickly. "A lapse in judgment, a terrible lapse." Marcus muttered, "Convenient words." But Daniel's older sister, Naomi Cole, who had just arrived from the reception area after hearing the commotion, narrowed her eyes. Naomi was a sharp, fearless woman who loved her brother fiercely and trusted her instincts more than sweet speeches. "A lapse?" she repeated. "No, no, Pastor. That did not look like something that started today." The room went still. Naomi looked at Vanessa, then at Pastor Elijah. "I remember those counseling sessions. I remember how often Vanessa stayed back. I remember how you always had some spiritual reason for needing extra time." Vanessa's face crumpled. "Naomi, please!" But Naomi was not finished. "Daniel ignored it because he trusted both of you." That was the sentence that changed something in the room, because now the question was no longer, did something happen? Now the question was, how long had it been happening? Daniel slowly turned toward Vanessa. The anger in his face did not disappear, but something colder entered it now, something more dangerous than shouting. "How long?" he asked. Vanessa shook her head, weeping. "Daniel." "How long?" he repeated. Pastor Elijah opened his mouth, maybe to interrupt, maybe to rescue the truth before it fully came out, but Daniel cut him off without looking at him. "You have lied enough for one day." Then he faced Vanessa fully, pain burning behind his eyes. "Tell me," he said, "did this betrayal begin before I said, 'I do'?" And this time, Vanessa could not answer quickly. That silence was your answer enough. The silence Vanessa gave Daniel in that broken church did not end in that room. It followed everyone home. By the following evening, The shock of the scandal had turned into something heavier, something uglier, not just rumor now, not just embarrassment. Truth was beginning to crawl out from under the ruins, and the more it came out, the worse it looked. Daniel sat alone in his apartment, still wearing the same pain on his face. His suit jacket had been thrown across a chair. His wedding ring box sat unopened on the table beside him, like a cruel joke nobody had the decency to remove. Marcus sat across from him, elbows on his knees. "You need to eat something." Daniel stared ahead. "I stood there and promised my whole life to her." Marcus said nothing. Daniel's jaw tightened. And all along, there was something else, something hiding behind all those counseling sessions, all those prayers. He shut his eyes, and for the first time, the memories began lining up in a way they never had before. The late evening meetings at church, the extra calls, the strange pauses when he asked Vanessa how counseling had gone, the way Pastor Elijah always answered with smooth confidence. "She just needs guidance, Daniel. Marriage is sacred. We must prepare her heart carefully." At the time, Daniel had felt grateful. Now the words made him sick. Across town, Vanessa sat in her childhood bedroom, still surrounded by wedding gifts she could not bear to look at. Her makeup was gone. Her veil was gone. Her polished smile was gone. All that remained was a woman finally cornered by the truth. Her father, Richard Moore, stood near the window, quiet as ever, but his silence was no longer soft. It was heavy with disappointment. Her mother, Claudia, paced the room with restless anger. "You need to stop crying and think. If anybody asks, you say it was a mistake. One emotional mistake. Do you hear me?" Vanessa's voice came out weak. "Mum, it was more than that." Claudia froze. "What did you say?" Vanessa looked down at her hands. "It didn't start yesterday." Richard finally turned from the window. "Then start talking." The room went still. Vanessa swallowed hard. At first, it was just counseling. He asked deeper questions than Daniel ever did. He listened. He noticed when I was scared. He said I could be honest with him. Claudia folded her arms. "That is what pastors do." Vanessa shook her head, tears gathering again. "No, it changed." Her voice trembled. "He started saying I was carrying too much pressure. He said I was hiding my real feelings. He said God wanted me to be truthful about my heart." Richard's face darkened. "And did you tell him you had feelings for him?" Vanessa closed her eyes. "Not at first. Y'all, this is how dangerous lines get crossed. Not always in one big moment, sometimes in little moments, secret moments, moments people excuse until they become sin." Vanessa continued, each word sounding harder than the last. "He would pray for me after sessions. Then the prayers got longer, more personal. Then he started finding reasons for me to come back alone." Claudia looked horrified now, though pride still fought with shame in her face. "And you kept going?" "I was confused," Vanessa whispered. "I felt trapped. The wedding was getting closer. Everybody kept saying Daniel was the right choice, a good man, a safe man. And I knew he was good. I knew that." "Then why did you still agree to marry him?" Richard asked. Vanessa's tears fell freely. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of disappointing everyone. Afraid of scandal. Afraid of telling the truth too late." Back in his apartment, Daniel stared at his phone as Naomi's message came through. "You were not crazy. Your spirit saw pieces of it. You just loved her too much to call it what it was." Daniel read the message twice. Then he whispered into the empty room. How long were they both going to let me stand in that lie? And that was the cruelest truth of all. The betrayal had not begun in the corridor. The corridor was only where it was finally exposed. The morning after Vanessa finally admitted that the betrayal had started long before the wedding day, Daniel Cole stopped answering his phone. He did not answer Marcus. He did not answer Naomi. He did not answer his mother. He pulled the curtains shut in his apartment and let the daylight sit outside like an unwelcome visitor. The same man who had stood before an altar full of hope now sat on the edge of his bed, with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might explain how his life had fallen apart in less than 24 hours. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. On the kitchen counter sat the untouched cake topper from the reception that never happened. In one corner stood 2 packed suitcases meant for a honeymoon that would never begin. Every object in that room seemed to mock him. Every object seemed to say the same cruel thing. "You were happy yesterday. Look at you now." Daniel pressed both hands against his face. "What did I miss?" he whispered to himself. "What did I miss?" He remembered Vanessa's smile at the altar. He remembered Pastor Elijah's hand raised in blessing. He remembered the applause, the cheers, the holy words, and then that corridor, that kiss, that look on both their faces when they realized he had seen them. Y'all, his chest felt like somebody had filled it with broken glass. A knock came at the door. Daniel ignored it. Another knock, then his mother's voice, soft but firm. "Daniel, open the door. I know you're inside." He closed his eyes. For a moment he thought about staying silent, but Helen Cole had not raised him to disappear inside his pain forever. After a long pause, he stood, walked slowly across the room, and opened the door. Helen stepped in first, carrying a covered plate of food. Naomi came behind her, her expression sharp with concern. Neither woman said anything at first. They simply looked at him, and what they saw made both their faces fall. Daniel looked exhausted already, not physically, deeply, spiritually, like sleep had passed by him without mercy. Helen set the plate down on the table. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "You still need to eat." Naomi glanced around the room, taking in the closed curtains and the untouched bags. "You look like you've been sitting in the dark fighting demons." Daniel gave a bitter smile. "Maybe I have." Helen reached for his hand. "Son." But Daniel pulled away, not from anger at her, but because pain had made even tenderness hard to bear. "No, Mom," he said, voice rough. "Don't do that right now. Please." Helen's face tightened with hurt, but she nodded. Daniel turned away from them and paced slowly. "Everybody keeps telling me to be calm, to pray, to trust God. But where was all that truth when I was standing there like a fool? Where was discernment? Where was warning? How do you let a man of God stand in front of me, bless my marriage, and then go hide with my wife?" Naomi answered carefully. "God didn't do that. People did." Daniel stopped walking. "But it happened in his house." "Yes," Naomi said, her voice firm now. "And that is exactly why it is so evil." Helen stepped closer. "Do not confuse the failure of people with the character of God." Daniel laughed once, broken and tired. "That sounds nice, Mom. It really does. But I can still hear him praying over us. I can still hear people shouting, 'Hallelujah.' Tell me how I separate that. Tell me how." Helen looked at him with tears in her eyes. "One sinful pastor is not God. One lying bride is not God. The Lord did not betray you, Daniel." He turned away again, jaw clenched. "Then why do I feel humiliated before him too?" Nobody answered immediately, because that was the real wound. Not only had Daniel lost the woman he loved, not only had he been betrayed in front of his family and church, he felt spiritually mocked, publicly mocked, like his faith had been dragged into the dirt right beside his heart. After a long silence, Naomi spoke. "You want the truth?" Daniel looked at her. She folded her arms. "Right now, you are standing on a dangerous edge, not because you are weak, Because you are wounded. A wounded person can do one of two things. They can bleed in private until they heal, or they can start swinging that pain at everybody around them. Daniel's eyes darkened. Maybe somebody deserves that pain. Naomi stepped closer. Pastor Elijah deserves accountability. Vanessa deserves consequences, but revenge will not heal you. Helen nodded slowly. Pain always makes revenge sound righteous, but it is still poison. Daniel stared at both of them, breathing hard. So what am I supposed to do? Smile? Pretend? Tell people I'm trusting the process? No, Helen said. You grieve. You cry if you need to. You tell the truth. You refuse to cover their sin, but you do not let this turn you into something you are not. Daniel sank down into a chair and stared at the floor again. For the first time that day, his voice dropped into a near whisper. I loved her. Helen knelt beside him. I know. I really loved her. Naomi looked away for a second, blinking hard, and then Daniel finally broke. Not with shouting, not with rage, with tears. He bent forward, shoulders shaking, and covered his face as the grief came out of him in heavy, broken waves. Helen put a hand on his back. Naomi stood near him, silent now, letting him fall apart without shame. Sometimes the loudest heartbreak is not a scream. Sometimes it is a grown man crying in a dark apartment because the life he was ready to build has already died. And by the end of that morning, Daniel made one decision. He would not go online. He would not give interviews. He would not drag their names through the streets just to satisfy the crowd. But inside him, the battle had only begun. Because silence can stop revenge. It cannot stop pain. By that same evening, while Daniel was trying not to drown in his own silence, Vanessa Moore was learning that shame is much louder when the wedding dress is gone. She sat in her childhood bedroom, wearing a plain house robe, her hair wrapped, her face bare, her eyes swollen from crying. The expensive makeup had been washed away. The glowing bride the church had admired just a day earlier was gone. In her place was a broken woman sitting on the edge of a neatly made bed, surrounded by unopened gifts, torn ribbons, and the remains of a future she had destroyed with her own hands. And the house was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was tense. It was full of the kind of silence that comes before hard truth. Claudia Moore was the first to break it. You need to pull yourself together, she snapped, pacing across the room with sharp, impatient steps. Crying will not fix this. What will fix this is control. We control the story, Vanessa. Do you understand me? Vanessa looked up weakly. There is no story to control, Mom. People saw what they saw. People see what they are told to see, Claudia shot back. You say it was emotional confusion. You say the pastor overstepped. You say you were overwhelmed. You do not sit here and hand the world a weapon. Richard Moore, standing near the dresser with his arms folded, slowly turned his head toward his wife. His voice, when it came, was low and hard. Enough, Claudia. The room fell still. Richard was not a loud man. He was a quiet, respectable father who usually let Claudia dominate the room. But when he finally spoke in that tone, people listened. He faced Vanessa. No more managing, no more polishing, no more pretending. I want the truth. Vanessa's lips trembled. Claudia threw up her hands. The truth will bury her. Richard did not look away from his daughter. The lie already did. Y'all, some households are not destroyed by one scandal. They are exposed by it. Vanessa lowered her head and began to cry again. But this time Richard did not rush to comfort her. He stayed where he was, waiting, not cruelly, just firmly, like a man who had reached the end of patience. Finally, Vanessa whispered, I never meant for it to go this far. Claudia groaned. Vanessa. No, Richard said. Let her speak. Vanessa wiped her face with shaking fingers. I thought I could end it before the wedding. I kept telling myself I would end it. Every time Pastor Elijah said we needed to talk, I told myself it would be the last time. Richard's jaw tightened. So there were many times. Vanessa nodded through tears. How many? He asked. She gave a broken laugh that sounded more like pain than humor. Too many. Claudia pressed a hand to her forehead. Jesus, help us. Vanessa lifted her eyes at last. At first I felt seen. That's the truth. Daniel loved me, but Pastor Elijah, he noticed the fears I did not know how to say out loud. He asked questions that made me feel understood, and then I started waiting for those sessions. I started needing them. Richard's face darkened further. And Daniel knew none of this. No. Her voice cracked. He trusted me. That sentence seemed to wound even her as she said it. She clutched the edge of the bed. The closer the wedding came, the more trapped I felt. Everybody kept calling me blessed. Everybody kept saying Daniel was the kind of husband women pray for, and he was. He really was. Then why didn't you stop? Richard asked. Vanessa looked at him with raw misery. Because stopping would have meant confessing. It would have meant humiliation. It would have meant disappointing both families, the church, everyone. Her breathing shook. And I was a coward. Claudia turned away sharply, but not before Vanessa saw the shame on her mother's face. I kept thinking I could marry Daniel and silence everything else, Vanessa continued. I thought if I just went through with it, whatever was between me and Pastor Elijah would die. She gave a bitter, shattered little smile. But sin does not die because you dress it in white. Nobody spoke after that. Nobody could. Richard finally walked closer, not to embrace her, but to stand before her as a father facing the ruins of what his daughter had become. His eyes were wet now, though his voice stayed controlled. Did you love Daniel at all? Vanessa's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Then why did you dishonor him like this? That question broke her more than all the others. Vanessa folded forward, sobbing into both hands. Because love is not the same as honesty, she cried. And I was not honest. I was selfish. I was afraid. I was weak. Claudia sank slowly into a chair, finally speechless. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, and said the one thing Vanessa had feared more than any shouting. You have done wickedly. She wept harder, and for the first time since the scandal began, Vanessa stopped trying to protect her image. She saw herself clearly, not as a bride, not as a victim, but as a woman who had chosen deception and called it delay. And once a person finally sees their own ruin, one question always follows. Can anything this broken still be redeemed? The following morning, while Vanessa was still drowning in the truth of her own choices, Pastor Elijah Grant walked into the church boardroom and discovered that a pulpit could no longer protect him. The room was cold, not in temperature, but in spirit. Gone was the warm respect that usually followed him into church meetings. Gone were the smiles, the eager handshakes, the easy laughter before prayer. This time, when Pastor Elijah stepped through the door in his dark suit, with his Bible tucked beneath one arm, nobody rose to greet him. Nobody smiled. They only looked at him, and every look carried the same heavy question. How could you do this? At the far end of the table sat Deacon Samuel Price, the senior church board leader, an older man with silver hair, a measured voice, and the kind of quiet authority that came from years of discipline. Beside him sat Elder Ruth Bennett, a sharp, deeply respected woman, known for her honesty and refusal to be manipulated by titles. Two other board members sat nearby, their faces grave. Pastor, Deacon Samuel said, gesturing toward the empty chair. Please sit. Pastor Elijah sat down slowly. He kept his face composed, calm, controlled, the same face he used when preaching hard sermons or handling delicate conflicts. But inside his thoughts were racing. This cannot end here, he told himself. Not like this. Not after all these years. Deacon Samuel folded his hands. You know why we called this meeting? Pastor Elijah nodded. Yes, and before anything is said, I want to make it clear that what happened was deeply regrettable. It was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment during a very emotional day. Elder Ruth's eyes narrowed instantly. A moment of weakness? Pastor Elijah looked at her. Yes. She leaned back in her chair. That is an interesting choice of words for a man who was found kissing the bride minutes after blessing her marriage. The room went still. Pastor Elijah's jaw tightened. I am not excusing it. But you are reducing it, Ruth replied. Y'all, when truth finally sits down at the table, polished language starts losing its power. Pastor Elijah placed both hands on the table. I was under pressure. The counseling process became emotionally complicated. I failed to guard proper boundaries. Deacon Samuel's face hardened. Did the emotional complication begin before the wedding day? Pastor Elijah hesitated. That pause landed like thunder. One of the other board members exhaled sharply. Elder Ruth shook her head, once, slowly, as if his silence told her everything she needed to know. Deacon Samuel spoke again, more firmly this time. We are not asking vague questions, Pastor. We need the truth. Was there an inappropriate relationship between you and Vanessa Moore before the ceremony? Pastor Elijah lowered his eyes for a moment. Then he answered, There was emotional involvement. Elder Ruth let out a bitter breath. Emotional involvement. Pastor Elijah looked up quickly. It did not begin as sin. No sin ever announces itself that way, Ruth said. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door opened. Every head turned. Margaret Grant walked in. Margaret was Pastor Elijah's wife, a dignified woman in her early 50s, known in the church for her grace, modesty, and quiet service. She was not loud. She did not seek attention. She was the kind of woman many people overlooked because she carried pain so privately. But that morning, there was no softness in her face, only devastation held together by discipline. Margaret, Pastor Elijah said, standing halfway, you don't need to be here. She looked at him with tired disbelief. No, I think I do. Deacon Samuel gave her a solemn nod and motioned for her to sit, but Margaret remained standing. She kept her eyes on her husband. How long? She asked. Pastor Elijah swallowed. Margaret, how long? She repeated, her voice still quiet, but stronger now. Do not stand there and preach to me with that calm voice. Do not do that today. He looked away. That hurt her more than a confession. Margaret stepped closer. I have lived with your distance for years. Years, Elijah. Your late nights, your hidden phone calls, your excuses, your habit of being fully present for everyone but never truly present with me. Her voice trembled, then steadied again. And all this time I kept telling myself ministry was heavy. I kept defending you. I kept telling myself not to think evil. Tears burned in her eyes now. But was this the first time? She asked. Nobody in the room moved, because everybody understood what she was really asking. Was Vanessa the first woman, or just the first scandal? Pastor Elijah's silence stretched too long. Margaret closed her eyes. Oh God, she whispered. That whisper carried more pain than any scream could have. Deacon Samuel cleared his throat, grief and disappointment mixing in his face. Pastor Elijah Grant, effective immediately, we are requiring you to step down from all preaching and pastoral duties pending full investigation. Pastor Elijah looked up sharply. Step down? Yes, Samuel said. You cannot be serious. Elder Ruth's expression did not change. What would be unserious is allowing you back into that pulpit this Sunday, as if holiness were a costume you can put on after this. His face darkened. I have served this church faithfully for 20 years. And that is exactly why this fall is so grievous, Samuel replied. For the first time, Pastor Elijah looked less like a respected pastor and more like a man watching his carefully built image split open in public. Margaret finally turned toward the door. Elijah, she said, without looking back, whatever happens in this room, know this. When I needed truth from you, you gave me silence. Then she walked out, and in that moment, the man who had spent years commanding the sanctuary realized something terrible. His authority was gone, his excuses were weak, and the fall had only just begun. 2 days after the church board forced Pastor Elijah to step down, the scandal had spread far beyond the hallway where it began. By Sunday morning, the church parking lot was full, but the spirit of the people was not the same. Cars still pulled in, doors still slammed, shoes still clicked against the pavement, but there was no usual warmth in the air, no easy laughter, no bright expectation. People walked in with questions on their faces and judgment in their hearts. The sanctuary that had once felt like a place of refuge now felt like a courtroom. Every whisper carried weight. Did you hear he admitted there was emotional involvement? They say the bride knew before the wedding. No, I heard the pastor manipulated her. Either way, that poor groom. Daniel Cole was not there. He could not bring himself to return yet. But his name moved through the building like a shadow. Some pitied him. Some admired his restraint. Some used his pain as conversation. And that, too, was a cruelty. Y'all, people love to say they are praying for you, but some of them are really just hungry for details. At the front of the sanctuary stood a guest minister invited to lead the service in Pastor Elijah's place. But before the opening prayer even began, the division in the church was already visible. On one side were those who still defended Pastor Elijah. He made a mistake, one man whispered to his wife. A terrible mistake, yes, but are we going to forget 20 years of service because of one failure? His wife nodded reluctantly. He baptized our children. He buried my mother. He was there when nobody else was. A few rows behind them, another member leaned forward, offended. One failure? He kissed a bride after marrying her to another man, in church. That is not some little stumble. Across the aisle, 2 older women spoke in hushed voices. Vanessa is not innocent, one said. That girl knew exactly what she was doing. The other shook her head. Maybe. But how much power does a pastor carry over someone seeking counsel? Don't excuse him because he wears a collar. That was the problem now. Nobody agreed on where the blame should rest most heavily. Some placed it on Pastor Elijah. Some placed it on Vanessa. A few, unfairly and foolishly, even asked what Daniel had failed to notice, as if betrayal needed a victim to help create it. The guest minister finally stepped to the pulpit and asked everyone to bow their heads. The room quieted, but it was the quiet of tension, not peace. After prayer, before the sermon could begin, Elder Ruth Bennett rose from the front row and turned to face the congregation. Her expression was sober, her voice was steady. Church, she said, before we continue this service, something must be made clear. Sin has happened among us. Serious sin, wounding sin, public sin, and we will not honor God by pretending otherwise. A murmur moved through the room. She continued, but we will also not turn this sanctuary into a theater of gossip. That line hit hard. Elder Ruth's eyes swept across the congregation. Some of you are heartbroken, some of you are angry, Some of you are disappointed in leadership. All of that is understandable, but hear me clearly. Exposing sin is righteousness. Enjoying the exposure is wickedness. The room fell still. Even those who had come hungry for more whispers shifted uneasily. Ruth went on. Do not use Daniel's pain as a story to entertain yourselves. Do not make Vanessa's ruin your favorite topic over dinner. Do not use Pastor Elijah's fall as an excuse to mock the church itself. This is not entertainment. This is grief. In the third row, a young woman slowly lowered her phone. Near the back, Deacon Samuel Price stood and added his own voice. Accountability is coming. We will not cover wrong, but neither will we let outrage become self-righteousness. If this scandal has revealed anything, it is not only one man's failure or one woman's deception. It has revealed how quickly people can trust appearances while neglecting truth. The words settled heavily over the congregation, because they were true. This scandal had not only exposed Pastor Elijah, it had exposed the church too. Its blind trust, its obsession with image, its habit of protecting titles faster than wounded people. By the time the service ended, the division remained. Some still wanted mercy first, others wanted judgment first, some wanted silence, others wanted every detail dragged into the light. But one thing had become painfully clear. The church could not go back to normal, not after this. Not after the blessing turned into betrayal, not after the altar itself had become a witness against them. And somewhere beyond those stained glass walls, Daniel was still trying to survive the wound, while the people who once celebrated his marriage debated his suffering like a Sunday topic. That is the thing about scandal. It does not only break hearts, it tests the soul of everybody watching. 3 weeks after the church service that exposed just how deeply the congregation had been divided, Vanessa finally asked to see Daniel. At first, he refused. When Marcus told him, Daniel did not even look up from the chair where he was sitting. No. Marcus stood in the doorway of the apartment, hands in his pockets. She said it's not to beg for the marriage back. Daniel gave a cold laugh. What marriage? Marcus let that sit for a second. She said she wants to tell you everything. No excuses this time. Daniel's jaw tightened. For weeks he had lived with fragments, hints, half-truths, pieces of betrayal handed to him one painful bit at a time. He hated the thought of seeing Vanessa again, hated the thought of hearing her voice. But another part of him was tired. Tired of shadows, tired of guessing, tired of letting silence keep poison alive. When? He asked at last. That's up to you. 2 days later, Daniel agreed to meet her in the church counseling annex, the smaller building behind the sanctuary. Not the main church, not the altar. He could not bear that. They met in a plain sitting room with beige walls, 2 chairs, a table, and a window that looked out onto an empty patch of grass. When Vanessa walked in, Daniel almost did not recognize her, not because her face had changed, but because the pride was gone. She wore a simple navy dress, no veil, no polished smile, no carefully arranged calm. Her hands shook as she sat down across from him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel said, "You asked for this." Vanessa nodded. "I know." "Then talk." Her eyes filled immediately, but this time she did not hide behind tears. "I don't deserve your patience," she said, "so I won't ask for it. I only came to tell you the truth, all of it, because you should never have had to pull truth out of me like that." Daniel said nothing. Vanessa took a breath that trembled on the way in. "What happened with Pastor Elijah started during counseling. At first I felt seen, then I felt attached, then I felt ashamed of being attached, but instead of confessing, I kept going. I let something wrong keep growing because I was too weak to stop it." Daniel looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "Did you love him?" Vanessa closed her eyes. I thought I did, but what I really loved was being understood without having to admit how broken I was. It was selfish, it was cowardly, it was not real love. Daniel's voice hardened. And me? At that, Vanessa's tears spilled over. You loved me honestly, and I answered honest love with dishonesty. That is the truth. Y'all, sometimes the most painful thing is not hearing that someone betrayed you. It is hearing them finally said you did not deserve it. Vanessa continued, her words now coming in broken waves. You did not fail me, Daniel. You did not neglect me. You did not deserve humiliation. You did not deserve that hallway. Every time I let the wedding plans continue, I was sinning against you. I knew that, and I still kept moving forward because I was terrified of disgrace. Daniel's face tightened, and look where that fear brought all of us. She nodded through tears. I know. Silence sat between them. Then Daniel asked the question that had haunted him from the beginning. If I had not found you there, would you have still married me fully? Would you have gone to the reception, smiled in the pictures, and lived like none of it happened? Vanessa's lips trembled. Yes, she whispered. The answer struck him, but this time he did not break outwardly. He only looked away, blinking once, as if steadying himself against a blow he had expected and still hated receiving. When he turned back, his voice was low. Thank you for telling the truth. Vanessa looked up, startled. That's all? He gave a tired, broken smile. No, it's not all, but it's the part that should have happened before the wedding. She bowed her head. At that same hour, in the main sanctuary, Pastor Elijah stood before a half-filled congregation. The church board had agreed to one public statement before final decisions were made. Margaret was not beside him. Her seat remained empty, a silence of its own. Pastor Elijah gripped the pulpit with both hands. I have sinned, he said, voice stripped of its old polish. Against God, against this church, against Daniel Cole, against Vanessa Moore, against my wife. I crossed lines I had no right to cross. I abused trust, and for that, I repent. The church was silent. I resign today, he said next, not because I was forced alone, but because I am no longer fit to lead while carrying the weight of what I have done. A few people wept, others only stared. Back in the annex, Vanessa wiped her face and whispered, I'm sorry. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I forgive you enough to stop carrying you inside my anger. Her breath caught. But hear me clearly, he added. That does not mean I keep you. It does not mean I return to what was broken. It means I release you. Vanessa cried harder then, not because she thought she was losing him in that moment, but because she finally understood she had lost him long before. And when Daniel stood up to leave, he felt no triumph, only sorrow, but sorrow with air in it, sorrow with space, because sometimes release is not loud. Sometimes it is just the moment a wounded heart finally stops holding on to what already died. 6 months after Daniel walked out of that small annex room and released Vanessa from the grip of his anger, his life no longer looked like the one he had imagined on his wedding day. But for the first time since the scandal, it no longer looked ruined either. The healing had not come quickly. It had not come neatly. It had not come in one dramatic prayer or one tear-filled night. It had come slowly, the way sunrise comes after a long storm, quietly, steadily, almost so gently you do not notice it at first. Daniel Cole was still the same man in many ways, still soft-spoken, still thoughtful, still serious about his faith. But pain had deepened him. He had learned how to sit with sorrow without letting it turn him bitter. He had learned how to tell the truth without needing revenge to carry it. And most of all, he had learned that being spared can feel exactly like being shattered before it starts making sense. That Saturday morning, He stood outside a community center, helping unload boxes of food for families in need. He wore jeans, work boots, and a plain gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Sweat lined his forehead. His hands were busy. His mind was at peace. Marcus carried another box past him and grinned. "Look at you, Mr. Quiet Redemption." Daniel smirked faintly. "You talk too much to be lifting that little box." Marcus laughed. "There he is. I was wondering when your sense of humor would come back." Daniel shook his head and lifted another crate from the truck. Inside the building, children's voices echoed from one room while volunteers sorted supplies in another. Naomi was already there, organizing a sign-in table, and Helen moved between families with that same gentle kindness that had held Daniel together when he nearly came apart. As Daniel looked around, something settled in his chest again. Not excitement, not romance, something steadier. Purpose. Y'all, sometimes God does not rebuild your life by giving you back what you lost. Sometimes He rebuilds it by showing you that your life is bigger than what broke you. Across town, Vanessa's life had changed too. She no longer moved through the world trying to protect appearances. That version of her had been burned away. She had taken a modest job at a women's shelter run by an older ministry couple from another church, far from the spotlight that once mattered so much to her mother. She spent her days helping women fill out paperwork, serving meals, folding donated clothes, and listening to stories that humbled her deeply. Repentance had become real for her only when it stopped sounding like words and started looking like changed living. One afternoon, as she stacked canned goods in a pantry, a woman at the shelter asked, "You always so quiet?" Vanessa smiled faintly. "Not always, just learning." The woman nodded. "Learning what?" Vanessa paused, then answered honestly. "That truth late is still costly, but truth is still better than lies." She was not healed fully, not yet. Some wounds she had caused still ached inside her. Some nights she still cried when she thought of Daniel's face in that corridor. But now, when she cried, it was no longer because she had lost a perfect image. It was because she finally understood the cost of choosing deception over courage. And Pastor Elijah Grant, he no longer stood behind a pulpit. After his resignation, he and Margaret separated quietly, not with screaming, not with public scenes, with grief, deep grief. Margaret had chosen distance, not because she enjoyed punishing him, but because trust that old and that damaged could not be commanded back by apology alone. Pastor Elijah moved into a small rented apartment and took a job doing administrative work for a non-profit outside the city. No spotlight, no titles, no crowds waiting for sermons, only ordinary days, ordinary consequences, ordinary humility. For a man who had once lived on public honor, it felt like death at first, but maybe it was the beginning of truth. One Sunday evening, Daniel returned to church for the first time in months, not to the same church building where he had been humiliated, but to a smaller congregation across town where nobody stared at him like a headline. Helen sat beside him. Naomi sat on the other side. The music was simple. The people were warm. No one knew all his details. No one whispered. When the pastor spoke that evening, one sentence caught Daniel so deeply he felt it down in his bones. "What broke your heart," the pastor said, "may have also protected your destiny." Daniel lowered his head. His eyes filled, because now, finally, he understood. If that betrayal had stayed hidden, he would have called it marriage. If that lie had stayed dressed in white, he would have called it blessing. If that kiss had not been exposed, he might have spent years building a life on a foundation already rotten beneath him. The pain had been real. The humiliation had been cruel. But the exposure had been mercy too. By the time service ended, Daniel stepped outside into the evening air and looked up at the fading sky. Helen touched his arm gently. "You okay?" He smiled, and this time it was not forced. "Yes," he said softly, "I think I am." And that was how the story truly ended. Not with a wedding, not with a scandal, but with something stronger than both. A man who did not let betrayal destroy his faith. A woman who finally stopped hiding from her own sin. A fallen pastor learning that titles cannot save character, and a truth so painful it looked like disaster before it revealed itself as rescue. The moral of this story is clear. Love without truth is dangerous, and spiritual position without personal discipline can destroy many lives. Daniel trusted with a clean heart, but trust alone is not enough when people around you are hiding secrets. Vanessa made the mistake of choosing appearance over honesty, and that one decision turned a wedding into a public disgrace. Pastor Elijah also failed deeply because he abused trust, crossed moral boundaries, and used closeness that should have remained pure. This story reminds us that no matter how respected a person looks on the outside, character is still what matters most. It also teaches that fear of embarrassment can push people into bigger destruction when they refuse to tell the truth early. A painful truth told in time is better than a beautiful lie dressed up for public celebration. Another lesson is that heartbreak does not have to be the end of a person's life. Daniel was broken, but he was not destroyed. In the end, truth exposed what was rotten before it could ruin his whole future. So let us learn this well. Pray, be honest, set boundaries, and never build any relationship on deception, secrecy, or emotional confusion. As a creator, I think this story is painful, powerful, and very realistic in the lessons it carries. What makes it hit hard is not just the kiss in the corridor, but the layers behind it: secrecy, emotional compromise, family pressure, spiritual failure, and ignored warning signs. To me, Pastor Elijah carries the heaviest blame because he was the spiritual leader and the counselor and the older authority figure. He should have protected boundaries instead of breaking them. But Vanessa is not innocent either, because she knew she was not standing in truth and still went ahead with the wedding. Daniel, in my opinion, is the victim here, though he also ignored certain warning signs because he loved deeply and wanted to believe the best. The parents also played a role, especially where pressure and image mattered more than peace and honesty. That is why this story feels so real. Nobody's choices happened in isolation. Everybody contributed something to the disaster, even if not equally. Now I want to ask you, who do you think was most at fault here? The pastor, the wife, Daniel for ignoring signs, or the parents for adding pressure? And have you ever seen or heard a real-life story like this before? What happened? And for everyone watching or listening, I pray that God will heal every heart carrying pain, betrayal, confusion, disappointment, or heartbreak. I pray that if you have been lied to, wounded, or publicly embarrassed, you will not let that pain destroy your peace, your future, or your faith. May God give you strength to stand, wisdom to see truth early, courage to walk away from deception, and grace to heal from what you did not deserve. And if you are the one who has made painful mistakes, may God give you true repentance, humility, and the strength to change. May your life not end in shame, but in restoration, wisdom, and a better future. Amen. It's Mr. Hope, and I will see you in the next video.